Back in 2006 in Kampala, Uganda, something happened. Something that quietly shook families, friendships, and whole communities like a wound that refused to close. A young woman named Annette Lubega was living an ordinary life. The kind of ordinary life that looks small until you realize that it was full of hope. She had plans. She had people who loved her. Her future felt like it was finally opening. And then, one night in June of 2006, she disappeared. Now, she didn't disappear in a dramatic movie way. She disappeared in the real life way that starts with confusion and slowly turns into fear. Annette came from a close-knit family. She wasn't famous. She wasn't rich. But she was the kind of person a home depends on. She loved school. She believed education could change her life. Not just for herself, but for everyone she cared about. And people always said the same thing about her. They said her laughter could change the mood in a room. But it wasn't only her laughter. People said Annette had a way of making others feel seen. The kind of person who noticed when someone was quiet and asked, "Are you okay?" The kind of person who didn't have much, but still shared what she had. That's why when she disappeared, it didn't just feel like one person was missing. It felt as though a light had been switched off in the middle of a room. Yes, Annette wasn't perfect. She had worries like anyone else. Life in Kampala wasn't always easy, especially for a young woman with big dreams. But Annette was determined. And that determination is what makes what happened next feel even more unfair. On the day Annette went missing, nobody felt danger coming. It was just a normal Kampala day. Busy roads, long lines, people working hard, people trying to survive. Evening came and Annette didn't come home. At first, her family tried to calm themselves down. Maybe she was delayed. Maybe she met a friend. Maybe her phone died. Maybe the city simply swallowed time, like it often does. But when night turned into morning, fear entered the house. Not loudly, not all at once. Fear entered quietly, like cold air slipping through a small crack in the door. Annette's mother kept checking the door, like her eyes could pull Annette back home. Every small sound outside felt like hope. And every minute after that felt heavier than the one before. Then the news came. Annette had been found. She was discovered in a remote area, far from the noise of the city, which kept moving like nothing happened. And the moment her family heard those words, life broke into two parts. Life before Annette and life after Annette. Grief didn't just show up and leave. It settled in. It changed how they all breathed. It changed how they spoke, how they slept, if they could even sleep at all. And almost immediately, one question burned in everyone's mind. Who will do this? And why? Because when something like this happens, it doesn't only steal a life. It steals sleep. It steals peace. It steals safety, especially for other young women watching from the sidelines, wondering, could it be me next? As more details came out, people started whispering things that made others uncomfortable. Annette was reportedly last seen with a local businessman. And not just any man. A man with influence. A man with connections. The kind of man whose name makes people lower their voice. And in places where power is heavy, people know what that can mean. It can mean that the truth becomes complicated. It can mean justice moves slowly. It can mean fear tells people, stay out of it. And that's how fear spreads. Not with shouting, but with whispers, with warnings, with people deciding it's safer to be silent than to be honest. Somewhere out there, someone was living comfortably. Warm lights, expensive furniture, the kind of life money buys, while Annette's family was drowning in grief. And that contrast is where the story starts to feel bigger than one tragedy, because it wasn't only about one man. It was about what can happen when power and violence exist in the same space. And nobody wants to challenge the powerful. The police were under pressure. People wanted answers. But the investigation soon felt messy. There were false leads, different stories, and strange silence from people who first seemed ready to talk. Witnesses didn't come forward, not because they knew nothing, but because they were afraid of what speaking up might cost them. And in places where systems are weak and corruption can hide inside normal process, fear doesn't always need to shout. Fear just makes people careful. And in Annette's case, careful became quiet. Quiet became delay. Delay became disappointment. Some days, it felt like the case was moving. Other days, it felt like it was being pushed into a corner. And the family started to learn a painful truth. Sometimes, when justice is slow, people start calling it normal. But normal doesn't mean right. And soon, the community started asking a hard question. Is this case unsolved because it is difficult, or because solving it would upset the wrong people? As weeks passed, Annette's story showed something that many people already knew, but didn't always say out loud. That respect for women wasn't just about one person. It was part of the culture. That violence against women wasn't just random. It happened too often. And that justice sometimes moved differently depending on who was involved. Women in the community began sharing their own stories, quiet stories, painful stories, stories that sounded too familiar. And Annette's name became more than a name. It became a mirror showing people what was happening around them. Women started looking at their routes differently. They started working in groups. They started warning each other. Because once a story like this enters a community, everyone begins to move like they are guarding something fragile. Annette's family stepped forward, not because they wanted attention. Grief doesn't ask for cameras. But because silence was starting to feel like a second kind of death. They held up Annette's photos like proof. She was real. She mattered. She wasn't just another story people would scroll past and forget. That day, people didn't just see a grieving family. They saw themselves. They saw what it looked like when a system fails someone who didn't deserve it. And something in the city hardened into determination. And in that moment, everything changed. The story moved from tragedy to fight. Activists rallied around Annette's story. They used the newspaper, messages, flyers, posters, banners, anything to keep Annette's name alive. And then the streets began to echo. People gathered, people marched, people demanded justice. Not only for Annette, but accountability from a system that too often protected the powerful and failed the vulnerable. The anger wasn't just anger, it was built-up pain. It was people being tired of watching cases disappear into paperwork. It was the fear of thinking if it happened to her, it could happen to my sister, my friend, my daughter. In parks, by roadsides, in public spaces, people stood together holding banners. Not because banners solve crimes, but because banners do something powerful. They refuse to let a person be erased. They tell the world, we saw her, we remember her, we're watching. As the years passed, the case remained unsolved, buried under delays, paperwork, and a kind of indifference that felt like betrayal. But Annette's family and friends made a decision. If the system wouldn't honor her, they would. They began building groups and programs to support women, push education, demand change, and protect others. They turned grief into action. They turned tragedy into a warning. They turned Annette's memory into a loud call that could not be ignored. Because sometimes justice doesn't arrive in a courtroom. Sometimes justice begins as a movement that refuses to die. In 2021, on what would have been Annette's 35th birthday, people gathered again, not only to mourn, but to remind the country and the world the fight against violence towards women can't be something that people remember only once in a while. Women's safety should not depend on luck. Accountability should not be optional. And even though the case still wasn't solved, something powerful had happened. Annette's story had planted seeds of awareness, seeds of courage, seeds of a national conversation that kept growing slowly, painfully, but steadily. Not loud overnight change, not perfect change, but real change. The kind that starts as a small flame passed from one voice to the next. Because the truth is, darkness doesn't always win by force. Sometimes it wins through silence. And if Annette's story teaches us anything, it is this: when we refuse to look away, when we refuse to reduce the pain, when we refuse to forget, even in the shadow of injustice, change can rise. Annette's laughter may be gone, but the echo of her life still speaks, and the search for justice, real justice, will continue. If this story moved you, don't let it end here. Subscribe to Super Stories from Africa for more stories inspired by real events and real struggles, told with heart, meaning, and truth. Like this video so more people can see it, and share it with someone who needs to hear it. And I want to ask you a real question. What do you think stops people from speaking when power is involved? Is it fear? Or is it silence? Let me know in the comments. Let's learn together. And have a blessed day. See you next week.